Great. So I'm Liz Fusco, and I'm the Director of Sports Nutrition for US Rowing. So it's essentially my job to make sure that we have good nutrition communications to our US Rowing members, that the athletes have good information when they're training, getting ready for travel, that they're supported during competition. So I may get to meet some of you someday. And really just making sure that everyone understands like the basic tenets of nutrition for athletes, because I think that the nutrition world can be intentionally confusing, and it's actually quite simple, especially in terms of hydration. So I thought that would be a good place to start today, especially since you're all training in a warmer and more humid climate. Am I right? Probably. Well, yes, I know that for a fact. So I think one of the things that we should, I think, start off with are some of the things that you feel. I know most of you have probably been dehydrated at some point in your life. I know I have. What are some of the symptoms and some of the things that you've experienced if and when you've been dehydrated, or some of the things that you know can be a symptom? Headache. Yeah, headache's definitely a big one. Dizziness, fatigue. That's actually a really good point. And the reason why you can feel that fatigue is because your rate of perceived exertion, or how hard you feel like you're working, is greater. Your heart rate is higher when it's at rest. So when you're doing workloads, you have like almost like an amped up heart rate at the start. You can definitely pass out. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point. And that's actually a form of heat illness, but that can happen. Lightheadedness and feeling overheated, those are all symptoms too. So water regulates our body temperature. It helps to move nutrients throughout the body. So there's also some side effects you can have, like GI wise. You can have, muscles are easier to tear in a dehydrated than in a hydrated body. It'd be like tearing jerky versus steak, right? A raw steak. So those are all really good points. And what do you think? Let's think about some of the things that what being hydrated can do for performance. Does anyone have some ideas about that? And I think I've already given you a couple of tips on that too. I'll start. It enhances our body's ability to regulate our temperature. So when you're competing or when you're training in a hot and humid climate, being in a hydrated state is protective in those times because it helps you to cool. Yeah, it definitely helps a lot. And I think one of the important things to think about during this ODP camp is that dehydration can be a compounding thing. Like it can, if you wake up dehydrated from the day before, then that training session and that day is going to be really challenging and difficult, and in some cases, potentially dangerous. So it helps us to actually recover more quickly from training sessions and from competitions if we're hydrated. It helps with muscle recovery, exactly. And one of the things that there's some evidence to support is that muscle cramps can be brought on by severe dehydration. It helps with our mental function. A lot of people mentioned lightheadedness or passing out, feeling a headache. Cognitive functioning is so important in the sport of rowing, especially when you're trying to row in unison, even as a coxswain, when you're calling a race. Being hydrated helps with our decision making, our motor control, all of these things that are really important in sport. And in this time of the post-COVID era, and always, hydration, water, and fluid helps to maintain our immune defenses. So our white blood cells are largely made up of water. So staying hydrated can just help us to make sure that that kind of box is checked off and that we're protected from a hydration point of view. Okay, so now we get to the fun part. There are a couple of ways that you can tell if you're dehydrated. Does anyone have any ideas about what some of those things might be? other than the symptoms, but like some physical things. Yeah, there we go. Pee color. So what color are we aiming for? Yeah, when your pee is dark yellow, that's a sign that you're definitely dehydrated. And what we often hear, yes, okay, I'm glad that you're saying this, because we want to actually try to find a balance. So we don't want our urine color to be dark, and we also don't want it to be clear either. If it's clear, that's a sign that we might be overhydrated. So the goal is to try to find that sweet spot right in the center, where you're going to the bathroom every few hours or so, and it's a pale yellow color, and it's a moderate volume. So if your urine color is dark, it's more likely that it's going to be a kind of lower volume, or at least a very long time since you use the bathroom, more than 3 hours or so. If it's a clear color, then it can be a sign that you're not absorbing a lot of the fluid. So like people that chug a lot of water really quickly, for example, you tend to pee it right back out if you drink too quickly, too much all at once. And so we're trying to aim for that kind of every few hours in the day, every 2 hours or so, and a pale yellow color. I have some athletes that say to go for the gold, not the silver or the bronze. So you can remember it that way if you'd like to. Well, let's see what we've got in the chat here. Yeah, so I think some other things too are if you're waking up in the morning, like that's a very helpful thing to think about, especially over the next couple of weeks in camp. If you wake up in the morning and your first pee of the day is dark, it means that you're underhydrated, probably didn't hydrate enough the whole day before. And if you're feeling really thirsty, then that's another sign upon waking or at any point in the day. It's often a little too late. And it can take up to a day for your body to kind of regain its hydration status in those times. Does anyone have any questions about ways that they can, what things that they can do to monitor hydration? Anybody have any questions so far? So remember, the real key is the color of your urine, pale yellow, not dark or light. Frequency, every 2 hours or so, not more than once an hour or greater than 3 hours between going to the bathroom. And volume, just that sweet spot, not too much, not too little. And it can take a little bit of experimenting to kind of figure out. Ooh, I love this. We've got some great questions coming in now. Okay, so we want to know how many ounces a day to drink. So this is very interesting because no one's the same. Every person is different, because all of those geographic locations that you just mentioned to me at the beginning, those of you that are born in warmer climates, southern states like Texas or California, where it's hot throughout the year more often, in the first 2 years of your life, you grow new sweat glands. So you grow new ones, and you just have a higher number than someone like me who lives in the Northeast. Because of that, you may have a higher sweat rate naturally. And then when you train, as you train just generally, but then also in heat and humidity, your sweat rate goes up. So even within yourself, your sweat rate can change so much depending on the types of clothes you're wearing, the temperature outside, the humidity, all sorts of things, the wind, the radiant heat. So rather than thinking about it in terms of, I need to drink exactly this many ounces per day, think about it in terms of, I need to make sure that I'm replacing what I'm sweating. And one way for me to check on that is to make sure I'm going to the bathroom every 2 hours or so. Keep an eye on the color of my urine. Make sure that I'm not going too long without drinking any fluid. And when you're training in more hot and humid climates, we can add electrolytes like salt to either your food or to your drinks in terms of a sports drink. So rather than, again, I think a lot of people are mentioning how many ounces in a day. Rather than thinking about it like that, think about it like increasing your fluid intake when you're sweating more. So someone asked what the side effects of drinking too much are. Oftentimes when you're drinking too much fluid, it's really just that you're peeing often. Like it's not extremely common to have an illness from a result of drinking too much water. However, too much of a good thing is still not a good thing. And there are some instances where people have had what's called hyponatremia. It can happen in long distance endurance events. It happened on a radio show one time when someone was chugging a gallon of water. Basically, it dilutes your electrolytes within your body, and that can compromise you in a number of different ways. So, and, you know, we don't need that much water. That's kind of the baseline, is like, we just don't need that. We don't need to be peeing every half hour clear in order to be hydrated. And if we go too far, which takes effort, honestly, most of the time, then we can put ourselves at risk for developing an illness. So there are some risks to overhydration as well as dehydration. So I think it's important to think about, in the course of the next couple of weeks too, how long you're exposed to this heat for and how much water you're losing. So one way that you can do this, if you're comfortable, is to just hop on a scale right before and after a training session, and any like loss there is fluid. So for example, if you lose 1 pound, then you lost 16 ounces of fluid, and you need to drink at least that much, but probably more like 1.5 times that much, so 24 ounces to replace it. You don't need to use this method. It's not essential, but it can be helpful if you're struggling to figure out where your sweet spot is with frequency, color, and volume of urine. So if you're struggling, then that's one potential approach that you can take. I'm going to check in this before I get to the sports drinks. I want to make sure I don't miss any up here. Yeah, so someone did ask how much water to drink post-workout or during. So that's one way to tell. And your goal in the weight change from a training session is that you're not losing more than 2 or 3% of your body weight. So if you weigh 150 pounds, then 3 pounds is the most that you want to, that's the point at which you're compromised in your hydration status. And it might take, you know, a day for you to replace that. That's when we want to incorporate more fluid-rich foods. And I think that's a good idea to do for everyone over the next few weeks, which is fruits and vegetables, soups and smoothies, and liquid-based foods. All sorts of foods are also very high in water. And just carrying around a bottle with you wherever you're traveling to. I know that there's a lot of back and forth probably between hotel and training venue. So just remembering to take those things with you. Okay, let's see. How quickly should we consume water? That's a good question. So I think that water can serve a couple of purposes. When you're on the water, it can help you to minimize your body weight losses so that you are not compromising your hydration status, you know, in the longer term. And then after exercise, depending on how dehydrated you are, you probably want to space your fluid intake out over time. So rather than chugging all of your fluid all at once, which may end up with you peeing clear, sip it over a period of time. Like take gulps at a time over a period of several hours, and incorporate foods with your fluid, like your recovery foods and your meals, because that can help you to absorb more fluid as well by combining food and drink. And incorporating salt too. If you need more electrolytes, or if you are a salty sweater, it's often pretty obvious. Some of you might notice this already, that you may have salt crystals forming, maybe on the brim of your hat, your underarms, places where you sweat, there's kind of white staining. That's a time when you might want to incorporate more electrolytes. And it can be in a sports drink. It can be in literally any sports drink that satisfies you. There's not really, I don't have any strong opinions about one being significantly better in terms of performance than the other. They're all essentially the same thing. They have around 12 to 15 grams of carbohydrate, and they have around 120 to 150 milligrams of sodium. There's a lot of other ways that you can achieve that too. One of the things that I do with the team is make sports drink using juice and some watered down table salt. So it's quite simple to do. If you have one that you like, then I think that's a good one to use, because there's also a potential cognitive benefit to consuming carbohydrate drinks that you enjoy. When they hit your tongue, there can be a performance improvement independent of actually kind of digesting and metabolizing them. So that's kind of a little fun fact about carbohydrates as well as, sports drinks. Some of the sports drinks that we make are like lemonade and tart cherry based, or maybe a pear or mango or peach juice to kind of make it more fun. We don't have any formal sponsors for electrolytes, but Thorne, Clean, and Scratch, and Noon are 4 kind of reputable companies that have quality products that are, fairly easy to use and travel with. As I said before, though, the only reason why you need to add a sports drink or add electrolytes is when you are losing a certain amount of sweat. So if you're sweating profusely and you notice that kind of sweat crystallization, salt crystallization, that's when you want to incorporate a sports drink. Typically, that's if you're training for longer than an hour and it's quite hot outside, or maybe you are doing a land warm up and it's very humid before you get in the boat, and you're spending time, maybe you're eating lunch outside after you row. Those are all considerations where you may want to add a sports drink or an electrolyte. You also, if you don't like it, then you can always just add salt to your food. And because sodium is the electrolyte that we lose the most of in our sweat. So that's the one that we need to kind of replace the most aggressively. Someone asked if alkaline water has any benefit. So our stomach has a pH of like 1.9 to 2.3. So as soon as that water hits the stomach, it's neutralized. Well, I guess not neutralized, acidified. Also, our body's pH kind of sits very comfortably between 7.35 and 7.45. And actually, it's even tighter than that. So there's not any benefit to trying to alkalize our bodies either. If we fall outside of that range, we die. So sadly, no benefit to alkaline water as of yet. Let's see, someone asked a question about drinking ice water versus warmer water, and I want to save that for the next little section that we'll talk about, because that's a very great question. Someone asked if they pee once a day, if it's bad. Yes, I would aim to drink more fluid, and go when you gotta go. That could be a factor in it too, but drink more fluid so that you're peeing more often throughout the day, aiming for every 2 hours or so. Okay. So someone's asking, wow, I got some great questions. People are asking about calling it a hydration enhancer. So there are ways that we can kind of hyperhydrate. It's pretty complicated. It usually involves like a fatty acid. There's one called glycerol that was actually banned in sport for a while, and then they added it back to the acceptable list in 2018. But there's other things that are very similar to that. It's a food product actually that can help with kind of holding more fluid and retaining more fluid. Also, sodium helps you to retain more fluid. So I think most of like liquid IV is primarily a high sodium electrolyte mix. So again, everyone loses a different amount of sodium. So if you're taking liquid IV and that's how much sodium you are losing, then you're not going to be hyperhydrating. So it really does depend on the person. And sadly, there's also not a great way. There are some ways for us to measure the concentration of sodium in sweat, but it's imperfect. So really, like, using those metrics, like how often am I peeing, what color is my urine, what's the volume, like that's really the tried and true method that we have for how to vary your fluid intake throughout the day, and looking at your pre-post training weights and being more aggressive with your fluid intake if you lose more than just a pound or two. There's someone asked if there were different types of water that we could drink to satisfy our thirst. And there's another really cool study out there that looked at the hydrating effects of different beverages. And it showed that there wasn't any difference between many of them. So all foods, all fluid-rich foods and all fluids can contribute to hydration, even stuff like coffee in small amounts. So obviously, if we drink 6 cups of coffee, then that can be dehydrating. But if we have 1, or orange juice or milk, tea, soda, any of those things in reasonable portions also contribute to our fluid needs. Yeah, I think someone asked a question that ounces of water that we should drink relates to your body weight. There are some estimates out there like that, but remember that it's kind of like a general reference. Like it's something that is meant as a starting point, and it does change. It likely will change from person to person. So let me just see if we even have that on our fact sheet. Yeah, I don't even think that we use that recommendation anymore. But we do have some general recommendations and starting points for how much fluid to drink before training. And I can actually, before we move on to the next section here, I will share, hopefully I do this right and nothing embarrassing happens. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Okay. And here. All right. Let me know if you can't see this. So this is basically what we just talked about. The duration of training, how fit you are, the conditions outside, influence how much water you need. These are all the things that it does. Some of those signs and symptoms. Y'all did a great job coming up with examples of those things. We talked about some of the ways that you can be dehydrated or indicators. And so this is our kind of general, and we say that the fluid needs are very individual, and these are general guidelines and a starting point. So our goal for before training is about 16 ounces of fluid, which is like a water bottle, a regular size water bottle. 15 minutes before, about 8 ounces. Again, when you're in heat and humidity, and if you're born in a southern climate and you're training in a southern climate for a majority of the year, or you know that you're a heavier sweater, then your numbers are going to be higher than this. And then during training, it's dependent on how long, how sweaty you are, and you don't need to aggressively drink fluid in every single training session. Even in most training sessions, you don't need to aggressively drink fluid, but just I think I just lost connection for a moment. Sorry about that. But I was just going through the fact sheet, and if you would like to see that fact sheet, the link I can put into the chat. Send to, there we go. Okay. And I think me just make sure that I answered all of these. Oh, and I lost some questions. Okay. I'm seeing some questions in the, I just realized the Q&A thing exists. Someone's asking about a pre-workout. I will say, I highly recommend not taking pre-workouts. They're one of the more dangerous supplements out there in terms of their risk of being contaminated. And they also often are a multi-ingredient formulation, and it's in powder form. So some of the things can sink to the bottom or float to the top. So you may be getting a much higher dose of some of those things like caffeine than you think. Also, many pre-workout supplements are not third-party tested. So not only do we have that risk of banned substances, but we don't know that what's in there is even what's on the label at all. It could be cornstarch, could be a complete waste of money. So it's risky, it's expensive. There's a lot easier ways and safer ways to do it. Can we just confirm, can everyone hear me? Did we have a loss of connection for a moment there? Chris? All right, well, I hope everyone can still hear me. Okay, good. Thank you, everyone. Now I can see you. Okay, great. So I have a question. Someone asked thoughts on Celsius. Is that a supplement of some kind? Oh, hi, Sunshine. It's nice to see all these familiar names. Let's see. Oh, it's an energy drink. Okay. So energy drinks. Oh, I think I know which one you're talking about now. Okay, so we can talk about some of this stuff tomorrow night too. I guess it kind of fits into here as well because caffeine is, you know, oftentimes it's coffee or a sports drink or not sports drink, but energy drink. So I will say very quickly with caffeine, lower doses tend to be safer. So we're talking about somewhere around 1 to 3 milligrams for every kilogram you weigh. So if you take your weight in pounds, roughly, divide that by 2.2, that's your weight in kilos, times that by 3, and that's kind of the maximum amount of caffeine that you want to consume at once. And you may even want to consume less than that. There's also responders and non-responders to caffeine. So there are some people that have a performance benefit from caffeine, that they feel a reduced perception of pain, that they can tolerate exercise more, whatever these things are. And there are the other camp of people who are slow metabolizers of caffeine, and they tend to have more anxiety, more jitteriness, potentially performance impairments, difficulty sleeping. So really kind of trust yourself and your body and how it's responding when you have caffeine, and also make sure that it's not too high of a dose. So the question on the Celsius, if it's a food, then it has a nutrition facts label. If it's a supplement, then it has a supplement facts label. So I would avoid energy drinks that have supplement facts labels right off the bat. If it has a nutrition facts label, then you know that it's going to tell you how much caffeine is in there. So if it says dietary supplement on it, then it basically means that it's not evaluated by the FDA and that there can be a range in there, like that every can is not going to be exactly the same. So it's a little bit riskier. If you take an energy drink like Red Bull, for example, that's a food product and it has a set amount of caffeine, 95 milligrams, and carbohydrate in it. So there are some that I think are a little bit more reliable than others. It could also be, you know, like having a lesser amount of that if you're a smaller person, and 200 milligrams is a little on that high side for you. So keep an eye on how you're feeling after taking the caffeine too. Like if you're anxious and jittery and you're not performing well, then you either have too high of a dose or you're not a responder to it, not a positive responder. So that's all I'll say on caffeine for now. I feel like I could spend an entire hour talking about that. Someone also mentioned creatine, asked if I would touch on creatine a little bit. That's another one I could literally spend an hour on, but I will say briefly that creatine monohydrate is one of the supplements that has been shown to potentially improve things like explosive muscle power and strength gains, and ability to kind of have quicker recovery in between sets and reps of lifting. So through basically providing more energy to support those muscle energy systems that you use when you're doing very explosive work, kind of like a lifting regimen, then it helps you to have more quality training. That's if there's not a nutritionally sound and adequate diet, which we'll talk a lot about tomorrow, the 5 R's. If that's not there, then no supplement, no energy drink, no amount of caffeine is going to have a positive performance effect. So it's really like remembering that the basis of good nutrition is being hydrated, eating enough carbohydrates, having protein and combined mixed meals and snacks throughout the day, eating colors and healthy fats, kind of repeating that every 2 or 3 hours. Then once that cake is made and frosted, then we put the sprinkles on of things like creatine and caffeine. So make sure that you get all those boxes checked off first. But if you choose to use a creatine, I would say any supplement needs to be third-party certified. That's by the NSF, NSF for sport, or by Informed Choice. Those are the two most reputable third-party companies. So they actually test what's in the bottle to make sure that it's what it says. And so if you choose to use a creatine, I would say it should be a creatine monohydrate. That's the form that is most used in the research and most supported in the evidence. And making sure that it is just that. So when you have something like a pre-workout or other kind of powders that are mixtures of things like BCAAs and creatine and caffeine and bicarbonate or beta alanine, each of those things is probably not in the actual dose that you need in order to elicit any type of effect. So, and you also don't know which one's working if you have a combination of things in a supplement. So get your nutrition on point. Once that's there, one thing at a time, and no supplement will ever replace or be better than food, even ones like creatine monohydrate that can work. Oh, and someone asked how creatine impacts hydration. I love that question too. So when you take higher doses of creatine, there are 2 different ways to take it. You can have a small amount over a period of several weeks, like 2 or 3 grams a day. Yes, I'll post the caffeine formula. And then the other option of doing it for how to take creatine is called loading, where you take more like 20 grams a day. So you take like 5 to 7 times as much each day. You take it with a high carbohydrate meal, and that helps you to hold on to glycogen, which is our stored energy, helps us to be explosive, which we'll talk about tomorrow too. And it also pulls in some fluid. Generally, there's water molecules attached to carbohydrates and to creatine when they move into the muscle. So there's some evidence to show that this can help with exercise tolerance in the heat. But one of the challenges with creatine loading, especially for rowers, is that in some people it can reduce our range of motion in our upper body or lower body joints. So it's not generally something that I prescribe or recommend to athletes if they haven't trialed many times and know that that's not something that can be a side effect for them, because obviously that can affect their rowing stroke. So I think really the best way to hydrate is to drink fluids. Drink fluids and eat fluid-rich foods, and do that throughout the day. Monitor color volume, all that stuff, frequency. And there isn't really a super fancy thing that is better or more protective than the basics when I decide. So knowing yourself is the most important thing. I'm going to post the caffeine formula now. Let me see. Here we go. I probably look like an old person. I'm like, eh. So you take your body weight in pounds, divide that by 2.2, and that's your body weight in kilos. And then you take body weight in kilos, and then you multiply that by 1, and then do the same thing, multiply it by 3. And that's your range. So somewhere between 1 to 3 grams per kilo. Now, older and mature athletes, people that are, fully developed in their post-collegiate careers can tolerate sometimes up to 6 milligrams per kilogram. But that's in people that are habituated using caffeine. There's also no evidence to show that avoiding it in training provides any additional benefit in competition. In fact, the risks of taking caffeine can be higher, like diarrhea, dehydration, all those things, if we don't trial it in training. So I definitely recommend, if you use caffeine, be mindful of the dose and practice it in training, and know that that's how you're going to kind of establish it into your race plan. And again, not going to be better than food. Okay. So the last piece that I wanted to kind of talk about today is acclimation and acclimatization. So I thought that it might be fun, and hopefully I don't disconnect again. It might be fun to share one of the pieces that one of the documents that I made in preparation for the games this summer. So just need 1 second here. Well, I totally just predicted that happening. Okay, and now there's another one of me on here. Okay, let's see if this works again. 1, 2, done. There. Okay, so this is some of the things that we're going to be keeping an eye on in Tokyo. So you should also definitely be keeping an eye on this while you're in Sarasota. And, I think one of the interesting things too is that in 2019, our under 19 team competed in Tokyo. So, oftentimes in the Olympic development program, you will be competing or if you make a team through Olympic development program, then you'll be competing in some pretty extreme environments. So it's helpful to kind of understand this stuff now. So if you're feeling hotter, someone said overheating, elevated heart rate, extreme thirst, headache, nausea, dizziness, muscle cramping, those are all signs of heat stress. Now, one of the things that we're going to be monitoring really closely is called the wet bulb globe temperature. And that factors in humidity, the ambient temperature. So what's the actual temperature that's reading on a thermometer? Radiant heat, which is obviously from the sun, but also reflecting off of the water or any other surfaces. Being in a very urbanized area, so a place that has a lot of cement, bigger cities, this can also increase the perception of the temperature. If the racing venue in Tokyo it's a cement structure, So there's going to be quite a lot of radiant heat coming from that, and urbanization. And then obviously crowded stadiums, so a lot of people concentrated in an area. So some of the cooling techniques that we'll use, and some of the things that you might even use someday, or even this week or the next couple of weeks. Someone asked me if cold water or warm water was better to drink in terms of hydration. There's no difference in the hydrating properties of drinks based on their temperature. However, if you're competing or training in a hot and humid environment, then consuming cold or ice water or slushy can actually help you to regulate your body temperature so that you can continue to perform. The same thing can happen for cooling packs, like little ice packs, ice vests. The U23 men's team a few years ago had these really cool ice helmets that I really liked. You can also just simply spray or douse yourself with water. And then there's some instances where athletes have used menthol. So there are some mint flavored gels, for example, and some like peppermint oil and simple essential oils to give you the perception of feeling cooler. And oftentimes when we're learning how to effectively cool, when we're exposed to these hot and humid environments, we're using a combination of different methods in order to achieve that. So just thought that might be kind of fun to have a look there. And some of the, when you're acclimating to heat and humidity, some of these signs of heat stress, like increased core temperature and elevated heart rate, are expected. And it can be difficult for the first 3 to 4 days as you're acclimating to hot and humid climates. I'm not sure if some of you are even feeling that right now, but it generally takes about 1 to 2 weeks to induce an adaptation where you are better able to tolerate the heat through a couple of different really cool physiologic actions. So you start to sweat a little sooner. Your sweat rate is higher, so you are cooling yourself more. The amount of electrolytes that you lose in sweat gets a little bit lower, so you're preserving kind of an electrolyte status, and the volume of blood that you have increases. So you actually have a higher fluid status so that you can tolerate the heavier sweating. And this is kind of just more of another recap. I think I wanted to show this to you really just so you could see this little, the color chart with the different urine colors on there. And yeah, so this is a recap of the Team USA document. Someone says, I heard that drinking cold water or taking a cold shower after a hot workout can be bad for your heart. Is that a myth? I would say, I always try to think about any way like that it could be a different answer than like my stock answer, which would be no. I don't think that drinking cold, like for a healthy person, I don't think that there's an additional risk on the heart. I think perhaps if there's someone who has a cardiovascular condition or chronic disease, chronic cardiovascular disease, there could be potentially some risk, but I don't know well enough to even say. I would say for healthy athletes, especially those that are in heat and humidity, and maybe even those that don't feel very good because they've been in heat and humidity for so long and they maybe feel like they're overheating, that can actually be helpful and be beneficial to use cold water, whether you're ingesting it, sitting in it, pouring it over your head, to help cool yourself. All right. Does anyone have any other questions? We have a couple more minutes. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk about nutrition and recovery for performance. So we'll talk about all the aspects of that. So I'm happy to answer any questions anybody's got about fluid, hydration. I could do a quick supplement answer for you if you'd like. Or if I missed one because I disconnected multiple times. Oh, air conditioning. That's a good question. Someone asked if air conditioning affects hydration levels. I guess it kind of depends on how dry the air is. If it's very dry, then it could potentially influence hydration levels. Again, an easy metric for keeping an eye on that is just what color is your pee and how often are you using the bathroom. If you're staying in a new hotel and it's a little like very different, then that's a really good thing to keep an eye on, and you're waking urine color. In terms of for cooling, air conditioners can be really helpful in places like Tokyo. We will actually have an air conditioned room at the venue so that we can help protect athletes from overheating while we're just sitting around waiting to race. So we like AC. Asking if rowers need to take any additional vitamins. Another very good question. And I would say that if an athlete's consuming their nutrition based on the recommendations that we'll review tomorrow, the 5 R's and the athlete plates, then they're getting the nutrients that they need from food. If an athlete is really picky, like eats a very limited diet of only a few things, and doesn't have, or maybe has a lot of allergies and isn't able to consume a lot of different varieties of foods, then that could be an instance when you might want to take a multivitamin. But the recommendation is the same. Make sure that it's a third-party product. It doesn't need to have more than 100% your daily value of anything. So if you have a vitamin, you flip it over and it's got like 100,000% or 10,000% of something, then it's not necessary to take that much. So yeah, I wouldn't say every rower needs to take a multivitamin. I would say most athletes, most rowers, if they're consuming a balanced nutrient-dense diet, then they're getting everything they need. All right. How do electrolytes affect you if you're already hydrated? That's such a good question. Man, y'all are thinking deeply. I think that how electrolytes would affect you if you were already hydrated, I feel like what would likely happen is that you'd have some fluid accumulation. So it wouldn't be like painful bloating or anything like that, but some athletes do feel slightly bloated if they have that fluid accumulation related to high electrolyte intake, high sodium intake. But remember that that's not always a negative thing in terms of fluid status. So you don't need more, but it's not the most harmful thing to have more electrolytes than you need. And does electrolyte water, is it different than drinking regular water? Again, that kind of depends on how much you lose. So if you need the electrolytes, then it can be helpful. The only thing with electrolyte water is that usually athletes also need a little bit of carbohydrate, if they're training for more than an hour. So it can actually be helpful to have electrolytes in the form of sports drink versus electrolyte water. An example for electrolyte water might be like if you're outside for like 20 or 30 minutes in heat and humidity, and so you haven't expended that much energy. So not a lot of instances when electrolyte water is better than something else. Thoughts on Pedialyte? Again, any sports drink, any electrolyte drink that you like and that you would choose to drink is a good choice. They're all pretty much the same. They don't differ that much. So if Pedialyte is your jam, then definitely go for the Pedialyte. I love that you asked this question about flying on a plane, because I think that's also really important to mention. So the question is, does flying on a plane dehydrate you, or can it? And the answer is yes. Also, even driving in a car can dehydrate you. But when you're flying on a plane, you have a tendency to lose somewhere between 4 to 8 ounces an hour just from the air, just from the dry plane. So it's a good idea to continue to drink fluid throughout your flight. I usually recommend that athletes bring a water bottle and even ask the flight attendants to refill the bottle for them. Just making sure that you're being consistent with your fluid intake during travel. And again, that you're using the bathroom fairly often. So obviously, if you're taking a red-eye flight, like you leave at night and you arrive somewhere in the morning, you don't need to get up every 2 hours and go to the bathroom. But if you're taking a cross-country flight, if it's like a 3 to 6 hour flight during the day, making sure that you're drinking enough that you're still on that schedule in flight can be very helpful once you land. Because if you come off of a plane dehydrated, it can take up to a day for you to rehydrate. All right. I think I'm going to answer one more. Someone asked for thoughts on beta-alanine. So I will reiterate, no supplement will ever be better than or replace food. However, beta-alanine is another supplement that's listed as an A-ranked supplement. So it's safe. It can be effective in some circumstances when there's certain energy systems that are used. So the important thing to remember with all of these supplements is that you're often targeting something very specific in your training in order to have the effect of the supplement as well. So with beta-alanine, for example, it can improve performance in all-out efforts that are 2 to 7 minutes in duration. So pretty great in terms of rowing, the potential to benefit that. But if you're not doing that type of work, for example, during winter training, or even like in late fall after head racing, then or head racing itself, because head races are longer than 7 minutes, then beta-alanine may not be effective at all. So it's about thinking about the time of year and the dosage, and if it's worth it to invest like the time, energy, money for the benefit. So I think beta-alanine can be helpful in athletes that already have their nutrition on point. But it is one of those ones that it's a little bit longer of a supplementation regimen. So it can be hard to stick to. And the cycling of it is something that's really important to make sure that you're actually getting the benefits that it elicits. Yeah. Ooh, Chris Chase says, any thoughts on getting too much sun and sunburned? That'll be the last question of the day. I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I definitely think that wearing sunscreen while you're outside is very important. I also think that being sunburned can present challenges for hydration in different ways, in kind of indirect ways. If you're sunburned, your skin is warm, you feel that warmth, you might sweat more when you're sleeping, you might wake up more dehydrated in the morning. So definitely wearing your UV gear, putting your sunscreen on, wearing a hat, and making sure that you're protecting your skin from melanoma, from skin cancer, or from severe sunburns, because sometimes they can blister and get very bad, but also that you're making sure that you don't sleep hot because you're sunburned. Protect your hydration status. Yeah. All right. Well, that was really fun. Thank you everyone for asking such amazing questions. And I really look forward to chatting with you again tomorrow night. So come ready with some more. All right. Bye.